Welcome once again to my weekly Bible teaching podcast. I'm Pastor Richard Seafried, and I've called this Bible study Timely Truths for Troubled Times. We sure do live in troubled times, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more today. I trust that as you have been following this podcast, you've learned several things that the Bible teaches. For those of you that may not have listened to last week's podcast, let me just review that quickly. We discovered that God brought the flood on the world in Noah's day for the express reason that there was violence. According to Genesis chapter 6, violence filled the whole earth. And then after the flood, God did something very unique and very insightful. He instituted what we call today human government, law and order. God instituted human government for the very purpose of not allowing the world to get so out of control as it did before the flood. And so what is the purpose of human government? It is to maintain law and order. It is to punish criminals. And that's why in Genesis 9:6, right after the worldwide flood, God said that that mankind was going to have capital punishment, what we call capital punishment. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. That's Genesis 9:6. And so human government was designed by God to quell violence, to maintain law and order, and to apply capital punishment to those who are criminals. Now I want to follow up on that because there's even a better passage that teaches this, and it's in the New Testament, in the book of Romans, and it is the teaching of the Apostle Paul to the New Testament church. And listen to what Paul says about the purpose, once again, of government. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. That the powers that be are ordained of God. I have to remind myself of that verse every time a president is elected that I didn't vote for. I have to go back and read this verse. The powers that be are ordained of God. Now listen to this. Whosoever therefore resists the power resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Now this gets back to the purpose of government again, to maintain law and order. Listen carefully. Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and you will have the praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if you do that which is evil, be afraid. I mean, every criminal needs to know that. If you do what's evil, be afraid, for he bears not the sword in vain. Another reference to capital punishment. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. I mean, folks, that's crystal clear. The teaching of the Bible is that God ordained civil authorities, police authorities, human government, the judicial system, to punish criminals. If you do what's good, you don't have to be afraid of police. But if you don't do good, you do need to be afraid, because notice what the Bible says. God says that policemen are the ministers of God. That's an amazing statement. And then he concludes in verse 5, wherefore you must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. Boy, our world needs to hear this message. In an age in which police are despised, spit on, cop cars. They get up on top of the roof and destroy cop cars. I mean, it is just appalling, the disrespect and the hatred and the animosity that is shown toward those who are devoted their lives to maintaining law and order. Now, we need to obey, then, civil authority unless, the one exception is this, unless we are asked to violate our biblical convictions. Peter said in Acts 5:29, we ought to obey God rather than men. But unless the government is telling us specifically to go against our deep-held religious convictions, we need to obey. We need to submit ourselves to their authority. Now, obeying includes a specific group of government leaders called magistrates. The King James Version uses the term magistrates. And let me read for you from the book of Titus, chapter 3 and verse 1. This is a great verse. Mark it down. Titus 3:1. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey, listen to this, magistrates, to obey policemen, to be ready for every good work. Isn't that a timely verse for today's world? Now, not all policemen are perfect. We all agree with that. We all were appalled last summer with the needless death of George Floyd. I agree that not all policemen are perfect, but I also believe all policemen are absolutely necessary. Now, there's three things concerning those of us who value law and order that I'm very concerned about, and I'm sure you are too. I'm concerned when our border patrol on the southern border are completely overrun by illegal immigrants. That's a great concern because we're losing control of our country. Secondly, I'm concerned when police do something that is deemed unfair and the response automatically is to engage in rioting and looting and civil disobedience. Let the judicial system run its course, as it did with the case with George Floyd. That particular policeman was convicted. Let the judicial system run its course. Why is it that whenever some incident takes place, many people, their response is to riot and loot? I'm telling you, our country is out of control. Another thing that I'm concerned about is this whole movement to defund the police. And that's not the answer. That's only going to lead to more criminal activity and more lawlessness. That is a real concern. Now, as Christians who follow the Bible, we need to do two things. First, support the police. Support them. That's what Romans 13 teaches. That's what Titus 3:1 teaches us to do. We need to support the police. Give you an illustration. The next time you're pulled over for speeding and you are issued a traffic ticket, how about doing this? How about thanking the policeman for maintaining the laws of our country and enforcing the law so that less accidents and less harm comes to people on the highways? That'll probably shock the policeman to no end. Express your thanks to him for the job that he's doing. Now, I've done that several times. It really hasn't worked to get out of the traffic ticket. I've also tried to mention that at least two of my relatives in our family are policemen. And while that's impressive news to the policeman who stopped me, it didn't prevent me from getting the traffic ticket. Oh well, it was a good try, wasn't it? Secondly, not only are we to support the police, but teach your kids to respect the police. We have whole communities in our nation right now where little children are taught from the time they're small to disrespect the police. They're taught that the police are the enemy. They're taught that you need to rebel against the police. We need to get back to the Bible. Teach our children to respect law and order. Well, we won't have a perfect government, I'm sad to say, until Christ comes back and sets up his kingdom. And I don't know about you folks, but the way our world is going with the lawlessness, the rioting, the looting, the lack of border control, just the disrespect for policemen that we're seeing across our country. I don't know about you, but I sure am looking forward to the return of Christ when he comes back and straightens out this mess. Well, may the Lord bless you, and I hope to see you again on this podcast.